Everything set up, gentlemen? Just about. Lights, cameras, action!
How's it going, everyone? Welcome back to the 70mm Mindset. This is episode 2. We are going to be talking about Florian Zeller's film, The Father, starring Anthony Hopkins and Olivia Colman. If you missed our first episode, we talked about Black Widow, and it was a really good discussion. So we would recommend checking that out if you haven't yet. But for this episode, we're going to be discussing The Father. And Nathan, what did you think of it? What are your initial impressions? Just real quick.
Initial impressions. This is not your standard film. This isn't the normal film that you walk into. You have to think about it. And I think it's like in an even different way than a Nolan film. Like Nolan films, you can still follow them fairly well. Like especially the less sci-fi influenced ones like Dark Knight or like Dunkirk or even Interstellar or something like that. But this film is almost all about that kind of deep analysis. And I think it's kind of made for us kind of people that like to really talk about and really analyze heavily these films.
For sure. There's a lot about the story that is going to be very unclear, at least to some people. For me, it was pretty unclear on my first viewing how exactly the story progressed. I don't know how that went with you. Like, how many times have you seen it?
I have seen it once. So I intentionally only saw it once before this recording so that I could give my kind of more raw impressions on it. I saw it about 2 weeks ago, so forgive me if I have something a little bit off in my memory, but
yeah, no worries. My story behind this one, actually, it's a little bit unique. So there's this one YouTuber, I want to give him a shout out because if it weren't for him, I would not have found this movie at all. So the channel name is Mauler, Mauler, and he released a video called The Father in Unbridled Praise, where he just talks about everything that makes this movie amazing for about 56 minutes. And since I've followed this guy for a while now, so I saw the video title that he liked it, that he was praising it, and I was immediately intrigued. So I just immediately went to Amazon, rented the movie, and watched it just so that I could watch the video. And I'm so glad that he uploaded a video about it, because this is now my new favorite film of all time. After rewatching it today, I kind of came to that conclusion. So I've seen it 3 times, twice about a couple months ago, and then just recently today took some notes on it in preparation for the discussion. So how did you like it for like initially?
So like right after I finished the movie, I wasn't sure if I liked it. Like I feel like like I had this like a little bit too much hype built up for it. It was like super overhyped when I heard that you like the movie as much as I do, knowing how critical you are of movies. So I felt a tiny bit disappointed at the end of it, but after a little bit further pondering and like deep analysis of what I saw, I think I've come to a positive conclusion of it.
For sure, yeah. There's really quite a lot to appreciate and quite a lot to unpack as well. So I think we can just start diving in. And the first thing, just to introduce the story a little bit. And first of all, we would recommend that you watch The Father before this discussion, because this one is going to be based on a lot of references that you'll get a lot more out of it if you watch the film first. And so there are going to be plenty of spoilers. So we would highly recommend watching the film first. Yeah. To start, it's basically about a father and his daughter and how their relationship how it grows and falls apart in some different areas due to the father struggling with memory loss. And some people come in and out of his life inexplicably, and he has trouble making sense of it. And this film really uses nonlinear storytelling to bring that confusion, bring that perspective of that confusion to the audience, and makes it really, really impactful. And I guess that would be one of my questions to you. How well did you follow the plot, if you can even call it that? I'm not exactly sure how I even categorize it.
Like a plot, like you were saying, that if you can call it a plot, because it transcends the...
Almost.
I had some issues following it at a couple points, but wasn't that kind of the point of the movie, to be confusing? And that almost sounds like a little bit counterintuitive there, but just the point of the movie was to be confusing, to kind of show Anthony's... show the effects and like how it would feel for Anthony's situation.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
It definitely develops sympathy for Anthony, because it's one thing to be able to follow the whole story from an omniscient perspective and just have all the knowledge of what's happening to Anthony, but when you're in his shoes, when you're seeing it through his eyes, and you realize the amount of critical information that he just can't hold on to because of this disease that he has no control over, it just makes it all the more tragic.
Yeah, it definitely did a great job with like really immersing you in the story in that aspect.
For sure.
If it wasn't for the nonlinearity of the story, we wouldn't really be able to relate at all to what Anthony is going through. We would just see the scenes of everyone else's perspective of him, like being like a forgetful elderly man. Really, that's what we would see. So we wouldn't have as much connection to Anthony and as much connection with the story if it was all from like a third person perspective on his life. And the movie takes breaks from that. It'll show things from the perspective of other characters, like what's her daughter's name again? Is it Anne?
Anne, yeah.
Anne, yeah. When we see the scene where Anne like breaks the coffee mug on the floor, the tea glass or whatever it is, and like she has that like like fantasy almost of like strangling Anthony.
Yeah.
That sounds weird saying it, but
yeah.
Speaking of, why don't we talk about that? What's that all about?
Sure.
I think it's more of a just kind of her hope to kind of like release him of his confusion or something. But
yeah, I took that as she is like, this is what the disease can do to not only the person who's directly suffering it, but also the people who are trying to take care of them, that they can take such extreme considerations as just killing a person to get them out of the misery. Because as you see throughout the whole film, she puts so much effort in, and so often there are misunderstandings where Anthony ends up blaming her for the things that are happening, but it's a misconception by both of them. So those pent-up frustrations can really lead someone to dark considerations like that, and I'm assuming that is the main purpose of showing her, like, thinking about strangling him and directly showing the events happening. I'm assuming that was what the purpose was behind it, and it was really dark the first time I saw that. I don't know about you.
Yeah, I got very confused, and I'm like, I guess the story's over then. But no, I think it did a good job highlighting the very difficult situation that they found themselves in, because Anthony, he's just kind of going through the motions almost and doing what he would logically do in his situation, and Anne is doing the same, but it's showing how there can be like conflict even if they're both kind of longing for an understanding and they want to be on the same page. There can still arise conflict through their very unique situation.
Yeah, and that's like one of the most heartbreaking things about this story is that it's no one's fault what is happening between the two of them. They're both trying their best. Olivia Colman is the actor. Anne wants nothing but the best for him, and to have him misconstrue her intentions so bad. Like, there's that one scene where they're initially meeting Laura, the new carer, and then Anthony goes on a couple-minute long speech where he just talks about how Anne is trying to deceive him, trying to take advantage of him, and then he intimidates her by saying, "I am going to outlive you and everyone else," and that just comes out of nowhere, and that's what really shakes Anne's character, like, almost brings her to her breaking point. And her breaking point, as we've discussed, is when she accidentally shatters the mug and then starts crying and considers killing her father just to put him out of his misery.
Yeah. One thing that I like to appreciate in this movie is details. I think this movie is a very detail-oriented more than any other film that I've seen. All the small details of the apartment flat, if you will, as they say in the movie. Yes. It's very carefully considered in the interior design, and the colors are very representative of what the characters are going through in the story. And that's one of the things that I appreciated the most in this film, was both the composition of like symmetry and whatnot within the flat, and the use of these subtle changes that they implemented throughout the timeline of the movie to illustrate how Anthony is slowly being stripped away from his like independence in his own home. Like, things started out as very comfortable and something that is his, and they gradually throughout the story from Anthony's perspective become more taken away from him. Mm-hmm.
And with that detail, the composition of, so for example, there are like 3 or 4 shots of the kitchen throughout the movie, and they're all composed the exact same way, but you can notice slight differences in coloring or material on the cabinets and similar things like that. You can notice all those differences, but this movie just presents them. It is not heavy-handed at all in trying to present you these details. It's got a lot of subtlety,
for sure,
and and I like that because Anthony is not deliberately aware of his disease at all, and if we're getting this film from his perspective, why would we be getting those deliberate close-ups or deliberate confirmations of his disease? That makes it even more sympathetic.
Yeah. My favorite shot, like really highlighting that composition, is the kitchen scene, the first kitchen scene where we see him unloading the groceries that he didn't buy. And like we see him going about his process, and that's really a show of the acting that the actor is able to accomplish there, because he does so many like double takes and very subtle body language. I don't know what the noun for body language would be, but very subtle body language movements that he exhibits are really telling of his like forgetfulness in a very like telling way. It doesn't just say, oh, he's forgetful. It says in what ways he's forgetful, all through very subtle movements with him unloading the groceries in that kitchen.
Yeah, and not only is he forgetful, but he tries to maintain composure. He tries to maintain a facade of being in control while going through this, and Hopkins balances the two, switches between the two really quickly, and like he just does so many small acting abilities that really separate him from a lot of the actors that I've seen. He is really good at displaying vulnerability, like in the one scene where he's being slapped over and over again by Paul. That is, like, I think that's his best scene acting-wise, is either that or his meltdown at the end of the movie, because he just has so many little actions, like just quaking his hands, quaking his arms, having breaks in his voice, stammering, whimpering, and those times when he breaks that facade of just being in control are incredibly effective. Especially,
I think we touched on this in the Inception episode of the Nick and the Nathans show. But I went on a little rant about how Leonardo DiCaprio is good at crying, and it sounds weird saying it, but crying is one of the most amazing things that an actor can do. And showing any complex and heavy emotions like that convincingly are just such a good thing to immerse and really almost trap the viewer in the story in the best way possible. Yeah. It's one thing if you can make everyone believe that what the character is going through is genuine. It's another thing if you can make them like almost know that what the character is going through is genuine. I never doubted for a moment in this film that like anything happening here was like fictional. Like, I mean, of course I knew it was a fictional film, but it seemed so raw, so real, especially with like the lack of jump cuts. Like the editing in this film is very unique. It's definitely an indie film from like what we see in the editing. It's these amazing like long shots that not only are harder on the actors, but are harder on like everyone involved on set, because that means that you have to put a lot more time probably doing multiple takes with stuff, long takes, memorizing everything. Just a lot of effort had to go into this on the production side of things. And I can really appreciate that whenever an indie film is doing something like extraordinary like that. And it's something that you don't see in those $200 million blockbusters that are so prevalent these days.
Yeah, definitely not as much. And yeah, I've actually just got the film pulled up just on silent, just watching these shots. And like as you were talking about those long takes, there was one for like just 10 seconds that held on. And there are even longer ones throughout the movie where it's just, and it's one of those scenes where Anthony Hopkins has to maintain that facade of control, even though he's forgetting really basic information that he should know. It's the scene where he was confused by Paul sitting in what Anthony thinks is his flat, but it's actually being moved in. It's actually him being moved in to Paul's flat, and like there's so much that you can say about the acting, so much to appreciate. And I don't want to take away from Olivia Colman either. She does just as well as Hopkins does. There's like she does those little things too that I mentioned with Hopkins, and she just, her facial expressions, especially when Anthony is going on that like 2-minute speech about how he's gonna outlive Anne and how he's gonna overcome Anne's plan to subvert him. The looks on her face as she's trying to maintain strength in the face of Laura while trying to stay strong in front of her. She is also hearing stuff that would be absolutely devastating for you after you've been taking care of this man for I don't know how long, like maybe a decade or if not more, and then just to have him say that, like that would be crushing. And she portrays that so well. Yeah, one last thing before we completely transition into like the full of acting. While we were on the note of actors doing these long takes, that's another reason why the kitchen scene is so good. It's like several minutes of an uninterrupted shot with beautiful symmetry. Like all the compositions that they are able to do in this flat, in this apartment,
are very creative for what they're working with. They are able to make what is probably just a very normal apartment into something really artful. This is just a very visually captivating movie, not just with the like shapes of the composition and the symmetry, but also the colors are some of my favorite colors in really any movie. Like I love to really dive into colors when I watch a film. Color grading is something I'm not good at, but I know I know good color grading when I see it.
Yeah.
And I'm just a sucker for those amazing colors.
Yeah, and they really make good use of the coloring throughout this film, where they'll show the exact same shots, like I said with the kitchen, just slightly different colors. And then you can see the flat becomes more and more like the hospital blue, where it's just like that light, cool blue that's just not very welcoming. And then you've got all the, like, it almost looks like cheap fluorescent lights, just a really uninviting atmosphere. And it just becomes more and more like that after being a really comfortable and warm atmosphere in the beginning.
Yeah, for sure. So I'm looking through the awards that The Father won right now, and I'm very grateful. It was nominated for an Academy Award for Best Production Design. And if Tenet wasn't also nominated for that, I would have hoped for The Father to win that. And being honest, I think this production design might be even better than Tenet with a $200 whatever $1 million budget.
Yeah.
Just the production design it's one of the more underappreciated aspects of a movie, but if it's good, you're not going to notice it. That's almost the idea of it.
Exactly.
That you are immersed enough in the story where everything feels natural, not like you're on a set or even on location, not like you're just shooting in some random area of the world.
Yeah. And then that cinematography also comes out when you've got this is kind of going back to just detailed stuff, but it's also cinematography. I don't know if you noticed, but when they go to the doctor's office just for Anthony's appointment, where they're just talking about the condition, the shot of them leaving the elevator is almost the exact same shot as the elevator going into the flat. But it's just really slight differences. And there's just beauty in the simplicity, I think, of this, because the cinematography isn't distracting at all. It just keeps the focus on the story, and that's what good filming should do.
Yeah. One of my one of the aspects of this film that I appreciated the most was the use of everything staying in this same building. When Anthony goes out to the doctor's office, we don't see him ever leaving a building. He's in the same building the entire time. When he's in the hospital, or not the care home, he's in the same building. Everything we see of Anthony is inside, kind of almost as a metaphor of him like being trapped in his head. And I'm not sure how much of this is my own and how much of it is from that video, but because it's starting to blend together after this much. But it's such a great display of how really trapped he is in not only like his head but in his situation. Like, Anne won't make sense from his point of view. Everything is being taken away from him, and he's really just in a very vulnerable situation. And I don't think that I've ever seen a film that can encapsulate that kind of feeling and garner so much sympathy for a single character. Yeah. It just does such an effective job making everyone care and really invested in Anthony's story.
Yeah. And then even more of that impressive use of just one flat. To get even more specific, throughout the film, whenever he experiences confusion from his memory failing him, like for example when the scene repeats where he discovers James and Anne talking about putting him in a care home, he hears that dialogue twice, and that just like really, really confuses him and makes him super anxious. And every single time that this happens to him, he goes back to his room. Every single time, because that is the most consistent element of his flat for him. And then that makes it even more tragic when, at the end of the film, it subtly cuts to him in the care home, barely even having that foundation that he had in his room anymore.
Mm-hmm. I'm checking all the awards for this movie just to see what a lot of critics decided upon, and Anthony Hopkins won Best Actor, an Academy Award for this film. Very well deserved. And he was going up against Chadwick Boseman with Ma Rainey's Black Bottom, which is a 1940s, 50s, I believe, film about him like playing jazz. He was going up against several other notable actors in some of the bigger movies of 2021, and I think that awards are not necessarily something that everyone should like set store by, like for whether something is good or not. But if something wins an award or several, that's definitely a tell of something's greatness. And I think it's impressive that a film with a small budget like this, like an adaptation like this, is able to get like big awards like Best Actor. It's just impressive.
Yeah. And I'm really glad that it got that attention, because I still don't know if I think this film has been discussed enough. Like, I think this should be, if you're a film fan, I think this is something that should be like near the top of your list for at least watch it once or twice, because there's a lot to appreciate with it.
For sure.
And I've got one more thing on the details real quick, so throughout the film, there's the one line in the beginning where Anthony says, well, the world is still turning. He says that, I think he repeats the line multiple times, and then he also, in his room, looks out the window to see the world operating like normal. One of them is to see a little kid playing with a bag that's flying through the wind, and a couple other times he just sees people walking and doing stuff like that. And he gets comfort in just even the simplest things, as watching the world, just watching the world function, watching humans be humans. And then even that gets stripped away from him at the end, where all that he has out the window in his nursing home is trees. And that's it. There's no view of like human life anywhere. It's just, there's so many intricacies that build up to conclusions like that like really make me appreciate the work that went into the script, cinematography, like basically every aspect of the film. So what were you going to get at?
I was going to say that we should dive into the actual story of the film and address some of the specific things that happen that seem out of place. Like, for instance, Anne's husband-boyfriend situation, who's Paul, what's happening at different points. And the main part of that I'd like to discuss is the one that is actively involved before Anthony's put in the care home. Because one of the first things we see is Anne talking to Anthony about how she's going to meet a man in France, and that's why she'd like to find him a carer. And are we safe to assume that that's likely one of the later things happening in the story?
I mean, I would assume so.
Because later in the story, we see Anne doesn't know about the Frenchman, like, because she's like, "What are you on about with this Frenchman?" Like, she would say that multiple times.
Yeah, she's like, "Why do you keep going on about Paris? I'm not going there or anything." And then at the end of the story, where he is finally in the nursing home, I think it's safe to assume that is like chronologically that is the last scene out of all the scenes in this film. Like that, like on a timeline, that happens last before all the other events. And at that point, she's in Paris. So I think it's safe to assume that.
Mm-hmm. Maybe what happened is Anthony is experiencing everything from, like the care home. This is like one of those Inception theories where it's like, is everything real? But maybe this entire story is Anthony in the care home reliving his past memories, and maybe Anne, like, he thinks it's in his flat, but he's really in the care home, and talking to him, that's in the care home after he's already there. Like, all the different discussions that happen, like, he could just be like talking to himself, reliving past memories, and that's why everything's out of order. That's a theory, maybe, but
I could see that for sure, because like I don't know how we would have context for who Bill is, the worker who also he's the worker at the nursing home who also looked like So I think he would have been in the care home thinking about all of these events. And this is more a portrayal of his recollection of it and how faulty it is. But we also still get those few scenes where we see Anne's perspective, and we get a little bit more of an omniscient perspective. Maybe not fully omniscient, but we get a little bit more context from those scenes, and we can still see how it affects her. So I think there's a strong case to be made for a lot of it, if not all of it, being from the care home.
Mm-hmm. And one of these things, like at least the first scene with the man the first man that Anthony encounters, the care home worker, that scene from then on, if we're talking about the story in a chronological perspective, then he will be in the care home from that point on. But then again, This is a non-linear story, so I don't think everything necessarily has a reason of where it's happening, of the different husband-boyfriend characters, and of like the conversations between Anthony, Anne, and them. It doesn't necessarily matter the context, just that it's all out of place and jumbled and confused.
Yeah, and that's kind of the whole point of the film, that it's so impossible for this man to understand, and that's why he's devolved to the way that he is now. Just so difficult. It's so difficult for him to do basic things. Like, he loses his watch multiple times, which there is actually a little bit of significance with the watch, because that's something that he can rely on that's like an object permanence thing, where he can rely on that to consistently tell him, like, that time is progressing linearly. I don't know if that's a word, but in a linear fashion. And so that's why he's so panicked when he loses it multiple times throughout the story. And that's why why he's so fascinated with it when he sees it on Paul's wrist, and Paul is trying to talk to him about what's going on with Anne and the carer, and he just can't get past the watch, because he finds those so important to him, because they're one consistent element of his life when there are so few of those.
Yeah. Another object like that, or motif, if you will, is the chicken and the dinner and the time. We have at least one evening that is either happening in real time or Anthony's recollecting. And it's on the same evening that the groceries are unloaded. Anne goes out to buy the chicken. Anne is home and cooking the chicken. They are eating dinner, eating the chicken. And they're always talking about this chicken. And it can be, it's presumably all happening on the same day, even if we're experiencing this day out of order. So I think that grounds everything a little bit, the entire chicken. After you say chicken so many times, it loses its meaning, but
I know.
The entire chicken idea is just grounding everything to one central, like, return point.
Yeah. And the chicken, as much as we're going to be repeating this word and it's going to sound silly,
semantic satiation is what
yeah.
what that's
the chicken is actually an important part of this story because Anthony first, he's telling Anne that he's freaking out to Anne about the man with the chicken who was just here and is now gone. And just imagine hearing that, like, from your perspective, you have just gotten home and, like, it's a normal day, and then someone's telling you about a man with a chicken who disappeared. Like, and that obviously makes Anne chuckle a little bit because it's so, it sounds kind of like a ludicrous idea
outlandish,
to her.
Very.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. And she starts chuckling about it to the offense of Anthony because from his perspective, he has just had a stranger enter his house and then had a tense confrontation with that stranger, only for his circumstances to suddenly and rapidly change. That is extremely confusing for him, and someone is just laughing at him while he is describing this trouble of understanding. And that's once again where it goes back to, it's no one's fault. It's just tragic because both people are trying their best. And when it keeps coming back to that, it's so powerful.
Yes, definitely. Are there any other objects or motifs that are repeated there? I feel like whenever there's a couple, there's always a lot more. Like maybe the stripes on the wall that are like reminiscent of the hospital care home. That's another.
I didn't actually pick up on that one. But do you have anything on that, or just throwing it out there?
This is a little bit from that Mauler, if I'm pronouncing that right. That video that
Mahler. Yeah.
It's from that video where he points out a lot of these details, like the furniture slowly grows to resemble this kind of stripe going along throughout the house and the hallway, where it's becoming more and more like emphasized on this stripe that is very reminiscent of like a hospital, of like the white and blue aesthetic. Mm-hmm. Speaking of, why don't we talk about the?
Remember that?
Oh yeah. Why don't we talk about the dream that Anthony has, where he sees his Lucy, that kind of nightmare that he has that kind of brings the memory of Lucy back to him.
Yeah, that one is really that one confused me on my first viewing because I almost thought like I wasn't sure if this was a dream or like at first. Obviously, once he got into the hospital, I knew it was a dream, but before that, I wasn't sure what it was, and I could tell the color grading was different. It had a much cooler blue tone to it that differentiated from the rest of the movie.
Like almost like an industrial, very inhuman, very artificial kind of lighting. I think lighting is one of the best ways that they can tell stories through cinematography. Like warmth is very inviting, and
for sure,
more neutral and cooler colors are a little bit more harsh and present kind of like a negative aura.
And that's huge in this dream sequence where he is in the hospital hallway, and he stares for a couple seconds at the visitors lounge, which is probably some place that he spent a lot of time while he was waiting to hear about what happened to Lucy after her accident. And so he glances at that for a couple seconds in his dream, and then starts following her voice again. And it's just in this hallway with the harsh fluorescent lights, that cool blue lighting that you were talking about. It's really present there, sets a really just dark mood, and then sees that really daunting image of Lucy talking to him with her face all beat up, lying on the hospital bed, and it does it's like the one moment that got me to actually jump a little bit in the movie. It does a really fast jump cut to him splashing his face with water to try and get that out of his head, try and recover from that really brutal experience. Mm-hmm. And then as soon as he gets up, he goes to check those same doors once he wakes up, and then just realizes that it's a closet. So he's able to confirm at least that was only a dream and not something that really happened. So there's a little bit of comfort for him at least.
Yeah, one thing that I liked about that scene was the methods used to build tension. The audio of Lucy saying "Dad" is definitely recorded on a studio microphone, probably mostly offset, very close to the microphone, giving a lot of presence to it. We were talking about this just before the episode, and I didn't even know we were gonna bring this up within the episode, but the presence, the distance from the microphone is very close.
Yes.
When Lucy is saying the word "Dad," and it's disproportionately loud, both to what it should be in real life and to how it's mixed in the film. And that audio is very unsettling and really draws you in and builds tension as we're hearing that kind of ethereal, like transcending voice that's outside of what's actually happening in the film.
And then the music in that scene also, which I think we should talk about the music a little bit, because it's a pretty simple score, I think. Like, it's not very dynamic, and it kind of does the same thing, just in slight variation throughout the different scenes in the movie. But the thing that stuck out to me the most about the soundtrack was in the scene where Anthony hears them talking about putting him in a care home. He hears that twice, and as he's having the realization that he is hearing the same dialogue again, as he comes to that realization, the music just starts to creep in. Like, as he starts to walk up, it's kind of slow, quiet, ominous, but then it just gets more and more intense as he comes to the realization, and as soon as it becomes too much for him, it just slows down as he closes his bedroom door. And there are a lot of similar moments like that throughout the film where the score really becomes impactful, even though it's not entirely that complex.
Yeah, I don't have a very good memory of a lot of the specific things in the score, but I picked up on those same general things. I really appreciated Anthony's probably like a audiophile hobby. That seems like something he'd be into, like listening to opera music on headphones. It's something I can relate to. I don't listen to opera, but I like to sit down and listen to music with no other distractions sometimes, and that seems like something that he would be very drawn to with his obsession with keeping time. Listening to music would be such a great way for him to be able to keep consistency in something, because with the music, it's giving you a constance. Like, if the same way he like freaks out whenever someone is about to leave the room. Yeah. Like he wants to cling for something consistent, whether it be his watch, music that he's listening to, having conversations with people. It just is a very fitting thing for him to be doing. And like the same could have been accomplished with like watching TV or something, but it wouldn't have been as artful in that scenario.
Yeah, and then with that music, something that's just like so tragic, because you mentioned how it creates a sense of consistency. Even the music at one point starts to repeat and starts to skip, just like his memory does. And I think that was some really, really powerful symbolism, because this is one of those consistent elements that he goes back to, one of his foundations. I would say two of his main foundations are his room, his watch, and then the music is another one of those that are not quite as heavily relied on, but he still enjoys it quite a lot. And when even that starts to skip and repeat itself, it's just another symbolic representation of the brutality of this disease. And he attempts to take a cloth to it, wipe it off, and fix it, which is almost analogous to him trying to come to terms with his circumstances. And just so many things like that that are so poetic really, really drive the film home for me.
I think another one of those is the painting that either is or isn't above his fireplace mantle. If the entire movie is taking place after he's left his own flat, then it's never really there throughout the entire movie. But from Anthony's perspective, he's in what's presumably his flat. So whenever we're seeing something, it can be deduced that it's what Anthony's flat actually would be, because the painting's up. He has his CD equipment. His kitchen is presumably something that he's used to. He thinks he's in his flat the entire time. So that painting that Lucy drew is a great marker of, probably one of the most prominent markers of him believing he has possession of the scenario, control of what's happening, or him losing that control. When the painting is up, he's still semi-comfortable, even if strange things are happening, but the painting is later took down, or he realizes that it's not there anymore, and it's very apparent that he no longer has control of his situation.
Yeah, and I think it's right after that scene where he realizes that the painting is gone. I think it's right after that scene that he gets slapped by Paul multiple times. I think that's where it was anyway. And again, that's just more shocking realizations in succession that just make it so hard on him, and that's where he reaches one of his two breaking points throughout the film, which I kind of want to discuss just that scene in particular, because that one really, really, it sticks out to me every time I watch it. I get chills every time I watch that scene, actually. I've watched clips of it multiple times too. So just the scene where it's the second time that Paul is asking him about if he's going to stop ruining his daughter's life. He has that conversation twice, but it stops short the first time, and this is the second time. And this is where Paul starts to really aggressively question him instead of throwing it out there casually. So I was wondering if there was anything you picked up on there that really stuck out or was really powerful, because we've already touched on Hopkins' acting, and I think he really shines in that scene too, but if there's anything else.
One thing I noticed is just what I've deduced is literally happening in the scene is he's having just a breakdown, a realization of his situation, and Paul isn't actually there. It's just a figment of his imagination.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
But he has this breakdown, and Anne comes in to comfort him. And no reasonable person would ever do what Paul did in that scene. So it's just kind of an embodiment, personification, really, of Anthony's struggle. And so that causes him to basically spontaneously break down, and Anne comes in to comfort him, and we kind of just see Paul, lurking in the foreground. That's the main thing that I took away from that is just what's literally happening. As for what is Paul actually saying? I don't have a very clear memory of what Paul was telling him as he was repeatedly slapping him.
Okay, so I think so first he says, well, let me find it. I think I wrote it down. Yeah, so he starts with the first question saying, how long do you intend to hang around getting on everybody's tits? And then he says, like, how long do you plan to keep ruining your daughter's life? Like, when are you going to stop this act? Basically just denying that just thinking that he's doing it for attention, kind of denying the reality of the disease and how it's affecting him, which I think is actually interesting too, because Anthony and Paul / James are similar in the way that they both don't blame the disease. They both want to find other reasons for it. So I think even drawing that similarity there is at least a unique idea to draw upon when considering how Paul and James are kind of antagonistic throughout the film a little bit, but they still share a similar belief, just with a different spin to Anthony.
Yeah, so bringing it back to the personification of Anthony's struggles, that could just be an embodiment of what other people are saying to him and what's being repeated, and just a more abrasive display of that. Probably what a more accurate medium of what Anthony is perceiving everything as. Because even though this story is shown from his perspective, I think it needs a little bit more to really drive home his interpretation of what's happening. Because we see Anthony put on this facade, is really the best word that we've used several times, of having it under control and faking knowing what's going on. But I think it really takes a scene like that to show Anthony's true internal feelings, because no amount of acting can show what someone is thinking when the character themselves is like acting. We're kind of getting meta here when the actor is acting a character that is acting, but it's just a great scene to serve the purpose of Anthony's perception of these things that are happening to him.
Yeah, and those are the most the scenes where you get like a really good window into what he's really thinking are that scene where he's breaking down with Anne comforting him, and then the scene at the end where he breaks down where Catherine, the nurse, has to comfort him because even Anne isn't there anymore. And those are the scenes where he's talking about how he hopes his daughter will visit him and how he hopes his mom even will visit him. And it's just all these things that no one who's has normal memory would be saying anything like this. And the fact that someone like genuinely thinks there's a chance of some of these things happening, it just, like, you can see the look of sympathy and dread on the characters' faces when they're dealing with him, like just like absolutely feeling terrible for him. And that translates to the viewers pretty often as well.
Yeah, one thing that you reminded me of in talking about the care home and his daughter visiting is how Anthony mixes up faces with people. I think it's safe to say that the first carer, which is really the same carer, but the first carer that we see in the film is Lucy. That's exactly what Lucy would look like. It's very close to what she looks like in that hospital dream. And that's why he comments on how she looks very similar to his daughter Lucy, because that's just him mixing up faces. And that's why Anne is a little taken aback by that, because in reality the carer is a little bit older and doesn't really look at all like Lucy. Another example of that would be Anne. I feel like Anne had either a very extreme like change in appearance or a temporary like actor change. I think like happened. Like I feel like for some reason it might have just been that Anthony was perceiving Anne differently, but I think Anne actually looked different, slightly different when she came into the flat. I think it might have just been a different haircut or something. But
oh yeah, see, I actually thought that too on my first viewing. I got that confused, but then I looked back. That is actually a different person. That is the same carer. That's Catherine.
That's what I
Catherine's
thought.
Actor.
Yeah.
But they looked pretty similar, so I got confused on my first viewing as well.
That was probably a very deliberate choice. What was
probably,
Anne's actor name? Karen?
Olivia Colman.
Olivia Colman. They probably cast the true carer after Olivia Colman, trying to find someone that looked very similar to her for that exact reason.
Mm-hmm. The other actor was Olivia Williams, who played Catherine.
We have a lot of name matching. Anthony Hopkins plays Anthony. Olivia Colman has a doppelganger named Olivia. A lot of funny stuff like that.
Mm-hmm.
Anything else you'd like to add?
I'm sure there's a couple things here. Oh, okay. That scene where he is struggling to put on his sweater. I'm going to keep saying it a lot because like tragic, like that defines so many just scenes in this film. But that's another one of those instances where it's just a simple action that Anthony is struggling to achieve, and Olivia Colman, Anne, just helps him out with that. You know, it's a kind gesture, but overall you may not think it's all that big of a deal. But it ends up prompting Anthony to say, Anne, thank you for everything. And there are just a few moments like that throughout the film. Another one is where he says, her hair looks really nice. And I think there are a couple more moments where they have a good moment of bonding. And I like that the film included those, because if it had only shown the struggles between their relationship, we wouldn't have any context for what their relationship used to be like. And when you sprinkle in those nice moments, another one is where he lays his hand on her shoulder and where he puts his hand on her face before they say goodbye for what could be the last time. If you sprinkle in those moments, you can establish that there was a great relationship here at one point, and it's just really sad that it's kind of crumbled into what it's become, which is subpar at best. And just realizing how few and far between that those nice moments are compared to all the struggle really makes you appreciate how much Anne is doing for the father in this story.
Yeah, I couldn't have said it better myself with that. You hit on a lot of what I was thinking about when you first brought the point up of those tender moments. I think that's referenced a little bit earlier in the film when the carer that resembles Lucy is first brought in, and we get a little bit of history talking about how like Anna's second in favoritism to Lucy, just a little bit of history like that, but that's contrasted very nicely with what little of what we see of those tender moments, and it really puts Anne in an even trickier situation, because Anne is mostly subject to fairly rude or perceivedly rude behavior from Anthony, but it's makes it even harder for her when there are those tender moments, and it's probably a little bit like their entire interaction reminds me of a Nolan film called The Prestige, one of my favorite Nolan films. I say that about all of them.
I've been meaning to watch that.
We do need to watch that. It's a great one. It's one of his earlier ones, actually, 2006.
Okay.
But anyway, in that story, there is a character. I won't give too much away, but a character that is in love with another character, and he kind of has two separate personalities. One where he loves this other character, and another where he's fairly rude and implies a lot of things negatively towards her. And one thing that she says in one of these moments when the male character is being loving towards her is he says something along the lines of him like actually meaning it today. Like, he'll have days where he means it and days where he doesn't. And she says, yes, and that makes it even harder when you don't mean it. Like, these days that you mean that this is going too far, but you know what I mean with loving her and not.
Mm-hmm. Sure. And I do have just one more acting shout out. We didn't talk about Imogen Poots. I don't know if you know who that actor is, but she was the one who played Laura, the caretaker who resembled Lucy. And there was just one moment where she had some really great improvisation where, because I watched this movie with subtitles, and I think they just take the script that was written and just use that for the subtitles instead of using what was put in the final cut. There was one moment where Anthony is making a huge show out of just taking his medication, if you remember, and he's getting super energetic about it. He's like he drank all his water, but he can still do it with the tea. He's really excited, and he wants Laura to be watching him get excited about it and stuff like that. And so he just says, "Are you watching? Are you watching?" And the original script just says, "Yes, comma, I'm watching." But then Imogen Poots actually says, "Yes, yes, yes, I'm watching," like really fast with a lot of excitement. And just adding that extra energy, it's little things like that really good actors can pick up on that increase the mood of a scene beyond just what the script might have said. So that's just a quick little shout out. But
yeah, for sure. I think improv is one of the things that can take acting to another level. I think the best example of this, I'm sure you've heard of this even if you haven't seen the movie, but a very famous example of improv is Heath Ledger playing the Joker in the Dark Knight. And in that film, there is a practical, real explosion that is happening, and the Heath Ledger, the Joker, is triggering this explosion via like a remote control, a remote detonator, and he presses the button and nothing happens, and it's supposed to blow, right? And they have a real location that they're blowing up with thousands of dollars of explosives and millions of dollars of stuff that they're blowing up for this shot, and it doesn't work as planned. So what he does is he improvises and like pretends to like fiddle with the remote control, and he plays very, very well into the character instead of breaking character. And the explosion happens about 5-10 seconds after it was supposed to, and he plays along with it, and they made the scene even better and even funnier. And like acting like that, sure, that's an extreme situation, but just tying it back into this film, how acting can really take everything to the next level. And I know we've already talked about acting, but this is just another great point, bringing it back to that improvisation, since you reminded me of that.
Yeah, and Hopkins had a couple that I noticed as well. It was similar dialogue. I can't remember it off the top of my head, but yeah, that's about it for me. If you got anything else, I don't know, but
I think I'm about finished with everything that I have to say with it as well.
All right.
I'm very I'm very happy with this film, but I think we should probably wrap it up by discussing this film from the perspective of a non-film person. I watched this film with a couple other people in my family, and we all had very mixed reactions to it. I had a reaction such as educational, and enlightening, but not necessarily entertaining. That was kind of a little bit of what I got from others, but I think that this is a film for if you want to really dive into a film and appreciate it. I don't think people that aren't going in with the expectation of doing that, I don't think they're going to enjoy this film as much, because it's confusing. It's a little bit all over the place, and sure, that's what it's going for, and sure, that's a good effect to add a lot of relatability to the story, but that's not necessarily something that the masses will appreciate. So that might influence our objective and subjective ratings for this. So take that into account if you want to think about that for a minute before we give our letter grades.
Okay, yeah. So that's actually where I really like drawing that distinction between subjective and objective, because whether or not it's palatable, it can still be amazing. It really doesn't matter how people perceive it when you're discussing the objective quality, but then that's going to change for subjective quality based on person to person. And that's where if I were, it's hard for me to really imagine someone who's not a film nerd watching this, because like I watched this 3 times as a film nerd, and I haven't showed it to anyone else. I guess I'd be curious to see what other people think of it that aren't as into film as I am. But I agree with you that they would probably, it'd be a little bit less palatable. It'd be a little bit harder to understand, because
not necessarily that they
really
couldn't understand it, just you'd have to put effort into it other than just watching the film. Yeah.
I get, yeah. I guess that's what I meant. Not necessarily understanding, but there's just more to it than your typical film experience, I guess I would say. So, if I do end up showing it to anyone else, I can get an update on that in a future episode, maybe. We'll see about that.
Yeah. So, I think I'd like to start out with my letter grading, if you think we're ready for that. Yeah?
Sure. Yeah, go ahead.
So, for my subjective, I'm still kind of working out my scale, but I think A is about as high as I'll ever go. So A would be a movie like Inception, or Interstellar, very artful, and I'm sure I'm definitely biased towards those movies, but that'd be my top. And I don't think I'd ever really go lower than like a D minus. I mean, I might give an F to a terrible movie like Wonder Woman 1984 or something along those lines. Last Jedi had a lot going for it, though, so we'll need to save that discussion for another day.
Yeah,
but
I got a lot about that.
But for The Father, I think that my subjective grade, this movie gets either a B or a B plus, probably leaning towards the B plus side on that. Just because it has a lot of these amazing like cinematography things and composition and motifs that I really appreciate, and all these small fine details that I love to find in movies. But it requires a little bit too much like thinking about to figure out what is they're actually going for with the film, because it's confusing intentionally, and that's understandable, and it makes sense after you've analyzed the film thoroughly. But really, while you're watching it, if I'm struggling to find much enjoyment from it while I'm watching it, then I think it's doing something wrong in that regard. Bringing it to my objective rating of probably a C plus for the average viewer, because It's a little bit tricky to digest, especially if you're not willing to watch it a second time or have a deep diving analysis into it.
Okay. Well, for this one, for me, it's my favorite film, so subjectively, the grade's going to be pretty obvious. I'm going to go A+ because, like,
Do you want to read your sentence film review for it?
Oh, sure. I'll pull that up here. 1 sec. By the way, go follow at Sentence Film Reviews on Instagram.
Yep. Just about to say that. Yeah, Nate runs a Instagram account where he posts single sentence reviews of a lot of movies, and I heard about one that you did on there. What was it? The Seventh Seal was what it was called.
Oh, yep.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Like a black and white film from the 60s, I think. I
think it was like 58 or something.
58. Yeah, late 50s. That seems like you enjoyed it, so I might need to go check it out.
Yeah, that was one that we watched in like a film and theology class in Winterum, and that was actually recommended to me by one of my classmates in the class because it was really unpopular when we first watched it, including myself. I really did not like it the first time I saw it, but then I watched it again like a year later when I had more of an appreciation for like just good writing in general, and so ended up really enjoying it the second time I saw it. So that's kind of a fun story there, and I still disagree with basically almost everyone else because very few people have enjoyed that among the people that I personally know. But anyway, one sentence review for The Father that I got here. The Father is a heartbreaking story that brilliantly encapsulates the cruel reality of memory loss through a meticulous incorporation of many cinematic aspects, a lot of which I think we covered in this episode fairly well. And my objective grade is going to be an A+ because I...
Objectively?
Yes, because because objectively is not... It doesn't matter how well people understand it, as it's just what the story is. Does it make sense? Yes, as far as I'm aware, that is...
It makes sense after you think about it, but when I say objectively, I mean from, like, a consensus of, like, the majority of people, not even the people that would watch this movie, but just of people in general, right? Would they say that this is an A+ movie without deep analysis, without going into a film review process, just off of their personal opinions after seeing it? Would they say that this film is an A+? I highly doubt it.
So, okay, I think we might want to just do an episode on objectivity and subjectivity because that would be fun, because objectivity isn't actually relevant to what people's experiences are, how they understand it. Like, I've done like a lot of like research and listened to a lot of commentary on this. I still don't fully understand it. I'm really trying to get there. But basically, objectivity is irrelevant of personal emotion, personal feeling, personal opinion, personal bias, any of that. And it's just analyzing the measurable qualities of what is there. And that's where I get my objective grade from. Just specifically references to the text, and not whether or not someone is going to understand it. And it's easy to like think about it in a different way. I could be wrong about it, which might be interesting to discuss in a future episode. But that's basically how I grade objectively, because it's typically like irrelevant of emotion is kind of my go-to definition for it. So that could be a fun discussion, sounds like.
Yeah, that might be a section of a controversial episode, because I feel like us talking about Black Widow was more of, not necessarily an echo chamber, but a fairly consistently negative consensus was what came out of it. With The Father, it was consistently positive. If we get to a movie where we disagree more or less...
like Knives Out?
Knives Out, probably stay tuned for that. It'll likely be kind of incorporated into that discussion. So maybe that subjectivity, objectivity would be a good discussion.
Yeah,
for that
there's
day.
definitely a lot to talk about there too. So I would look forward to that if we did it. But
Yeah, definitely. In wrapping up, I think we should do like a weekly self-plug section because it seems like we're always
why not? Sure.
figuring out something new each week.
Okay.
For me, I'm now selling prints of my photographic work through Fine Art America. I have my own website that I will link in the description/show notes for this podcast. So if you are interested in prints of any of my photographic material, my best work is featured on my my website, where you can purchase prints directly and they will be shipped to you. The service that I'm using called Fine Art America, it's got a slight quirk to it. It allows you to get prints on everyday items. So if you'd like one of my photos on a bath towel or a face mask or a mug, you can. But I recommend you get a wall art print, as it'll be called on the website. Metal is my personal favorite material. It gives you a lot of great color accuracy and contrast. You can also get a canvas that'll fit in a little bit more nicely on a wall, or a pre-framed print, which is what I'd recommend if you're getting it in a frame, because a lot of my prints are cropped at unusual aspect ratios, so you'll have a hard time finding a frame for that. But I will be linking my website, so if you're at all interested in any of my photos, or you don't know of my photos and you'd like to see them, check them out there.
And if you're interested in the movie Tenet at all, there does happen to be a picture on that website that echoes that film pretty well, at least the color schemes. So if I were to get one, that would be the one for me. So if there are any Tenet fans, go check that out for sure. And you've also got the photo account on Instagram, right?
Oh, yep. Nathan Mathews Photo. That's where I'm at. I think we mentioned that in the last episode. And follow me on Twitter at Nathan Mathews. There's an N in between the Nathan and Mathews, so it looks like Nathan Mathews, but it's that's not available. So my Twitter handle is Nathan N Mathews. I talk about tech and promote my stuff sometimes over there, so that's cool. Yep. Be sure to see our other podcast, Nic and the Nathans, where we hang out with Nic Ansuini for a little bit. I'm not sure what he's more known for now with his SpaceX stuff or with the M1 Cube, but he's successful in several different areas. So if you know who Nic Ansuini is, be sure to check out that podcast, or if you don't, still go check it out. It's just a long-form general discussion podcast where we talk about being a creative person and what we do in those pursuits, our processes, and whatever topics we think would be interesting, and almost philosophical discussions sometimes of what we have planned in the future.
For sure. And also go check out his album Interpretations. I've listened to it like 5 times while doing like schoolwork and stuff. It's really nice to focus to. So that's Torch Decade Interpretations.
Yep.
I don't know where all you can find that, but
that's my musical project. I'm currently working on some tunes under my own name, so be sure to keep a lookout for that. Following me on Twitter is the best way to do that. But I should have singles dropping within the next month or so. So definitely be on the lookout for that. Nice. And I'm working on a longer album and a couple collaborations. So definitely stay on the lookout for that.
Yep. And I basically run a YouTube channel where I'm posting remade movie trailers, some remade TV spots, travel videos, similar things to that. Going to be uploading a montage from our trip to Lake Superior around Minnesota soon, so that'll be looking forward to getting that out there. And I run Scented Film Reviews on Instagram, which I've already talked about. And my YouTube Instagram is just Nathan Culli Edits, all one word. And on Twitter, I'll be talking about films and tech mainly. And I did go on a long thread about objectivity versus subjectivity again, because no surprise there. That Twitter is just at Nathan Culli, and I recently just started a link tree, so I can put all of those. I can just put the link tree in the description to make it easier. And yeah, that's about all I got.
Yep. All of these links you can find in the show notes description. Be sure to stay tuned for future episodes. We already have a couple ideas in the pipeline.
Yep.
So we've mentioned Knives Out in this episode, and there's a couple other things we have on the list that we'll keep secret for now, but you will know in time.
All right.
We're hoping to have this be a weekly show, probably, so we can try to stay fairly consistent with that. Nic and the Nathans, I was going to say this earlier when we were talking about it, but Nic, if you've been following him, he's busy living the dream in Boca Chica, Starbase, Texas, documenting and photographing, basically reporting and being a first-hand account of what's happening there as SpaceX is hopefully building their way to Mars. So be sure to check out Nic and that stuff. And that's why we haven't done a Nic and the Nathans in a minute, because he's a little bit busy with that. But
he's been doing great work there, and Elon has replied to him 1 or 2 times, I think. He's been on trending for SpaceX too, so
yep.
He's doing great work. Definitely worth checking out if you even have some mild interest in space. I've been interested in what he's putting out, and I hardly know anything about space, so I'm sure a follow will be well worth your time.
Definitely. He is producing some very unique content that there's not very many people in that niche, and he seems to have found his niche, so that's congratulations to him.
Yes.
All right. Any final thoughts?
I'm good.
All right. Be sure to stay tuned. We'll see you all in a future episode. This has been the 70mm Mindset. I've been Nathan. This has been Nate.
Yep.
See ya.
All right, bye.